All right, cool. All right. So today on our show, we have Zane Landin. Zane, do you want to like tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I'm Zane Landin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 25. I'm currently in California, but I've actually been living in DC since January because I work for the National Geographic Society. So I moved for the role. It's my first entry level role, after graduating. I just graduated recently from Cal Poly Pomona with a Bachelor of Science in Communication and PR. And I just find the world of communication and storytelling really fascinating. And as it has to do with suicide prevention, mental health, and disability rights, I think the most important thing you can do is how do we effectively tell our stories to inspire others to actually take action in their life and show up for people in their life if that person is suicidal or if they are suicidal. And I think hearing a story of inspiration. And I was part of an organization where it was about when you tell your story, 80% needs to be positive and then 20% can be negative. Because if you're going to tell a story about suicide, if it's not in any way a little positive or over maybe even like a little overwhelmingly positive, I don't know if people in the audience are going to resonate with that. And I don't know if people are going to like find inspiration in their life to reach out for help if they haven't done so. So I think it's an important rule. Not everyone has to do, but I think that's where inspiration happens. And I think that's when we tell our stories that way. And it doesn't, and positive does not mean it has to be sunshine and unicorns. What I mean is positive is like owning your story and talking about what you've gone through in such a raw manner, but also what you're doing now and how you're continuing your journey despite how you felt before. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you've had opportunities to share your story on like multiple platforms, is what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
So like, I guess like a question that I have is, what is the most I guess interesting place that you've spoken or interesting group that you've spoken to where it's like this is the one that's in the forefront of your mind.
Okay, I will share that two things come to my mind. I was on the Conversationalist, which is a Gen Z talk show podcast. It was an in-person podcast by Sophie Barron in New York. And so that was like one of the few times where I actually was on a podcast that was like an in-person podcast at a studio. And the way it looked was it was just a really nice studio and I just wasn't used to that. I was used to doing online podcasts and so I was really nervous and the purpose of the podcast or the show was to break echo chambers. So like at least on like these platforms where I'm speaking and sharing my story, that's not the case. I'm not trying to break echo chambers. I am trying to just share my story, but that one was share your story but also break echo chambers, which means that we are purposely and intentionally willing to engage in this dialogue where we are absolutely going to disagree, which I thought was beautiful because I think that's a very important thing that we need to do. And then the recent thing I was on, I applied for to be on Jubilee. So I was actually on one of Jubilee's videos. It hasn't come out yet. I did the recording 2 weeks ago, and
Ooh.
so it's gonna come out in 2 months. Am I
Oh
supposed
my
to mention that?
gosh.
I don't know if I'm supposed to mention that I was on it. I think it's fine. But that will be coming out. That was a different one. That was kind of like talking about the intersection of our political identity with our queer identity because I'm queer. So that was another interesting one. That's probably the biggest platform I'm going to be on, or not ever, that I'm going to be on from everything else since their videos do get like 3 to 4 million views. That was an interesting conversation. That was in person and it was what for their middle ground episode. So if you see middle ground and like how the whole place is black and they just have like the three spotlights and you're in the center, that's how it looks.
Oh
And
my
then like
gosh.
when they turned the lights off, I was like, oh my gosh, this is middle ground. It's like a little intimidating because this is how it looks and it's like completely dark except for the spotlights. So it was really exciting. It was really nice. And I think that the conversation went really well and we actually found a lot of common ground, even if we're from like different places politically, we still find common ground as queer people, and that's the point.
I adore that and I can't wait to watch that. And again, I'm just mind blown by all of the wonderful things you have going on, Zane. I think what I appreciated the most was how you really emphasized intentional storytelling because I think, especially in the mental health space, we always try to be intentional, but things bubble up and come out. And especially because we're in the mental health context, telling our life stories, things are out of our control. So, all of that being said, Zane, I'd love to hear more like about your origin story and how you got into storytelling. How did you get here? I would love to know more.
Yeah, sure. I think, my origin story, like I'm from, you know, like lower middle class suburbs. Um, you know, I lived in like somewhat a diverse area. And so I had friends of different races growing up. And I think that I always kind of struggle with managing my emotions from a very young age. And sometimes I was called oversensitive. And I think, looking back, I don't know if that's the approach that I would take with my kids and saying they're oversensitive because whether you think it or not, the person's still going through some form of emotion, right? And I don't know if that's the best case. I think you can say, like, let's try to look at this rationally, or maybe this person really didn't mean that, instead of going, oh, you're just being too sensitive because it makes you feel like there's something wrong with your emotions, rather than, well, I'm feeling this way. What am I supposed to do about it? And so that's why I appreciate what you said that, some things are out of our control, because like sometimes we don't have control of our emotions. I think that's the unique predicament about mental health, is that people think that we should have control of everything. And so like when you even look at physical health, people try to control as much physical health as possible, but they can recognize that there are many things of our health we can't control. Many things. Like if someone has a heart condition that's genetic in their family, somewhat uncontrollable. There are things you can do if you want to take medication or you exercise, whatever it is that you can do to lessen the symptoms, whatever it is. I don't know. But mental health is very different, and there are many deliberate things you can do to better your mental health. Again, it doesn't mean it's in your control. I think because it's about the mind, that people think that the mind and body are totally separate. I don't think that they are. I think that, you're still thinking and processing through your body, and your brain is part of your body. And so if your heart if your heart, if something in your health is uncontrollable, like your heart, like with certain condition, so can your mind. And so luckily, actually, I did have parents that understood that. Luckily, my mom knew a lot about mental health. There was mental health conditions in my ancestry and my family, and so my mom knew that there was no shame to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist at a young age. So I saw a psychologist from like the beginning of middle school to the end of high school. So like a good 7 to 8 years. Yeah. And so that was interesting because even though the stigma does exist for mental health, I kind of was at a place where I didn't think about it too much. Because when I was 12 or 13, I didn't think about it too heavily. I was like, I'm just here um seeing a doctor, just like I do when I see a pediatrician. And so I never really thought anything of it, but I still felt it a little. And that has to do with what, society thought. I just never mentioned it to anyone. Mostly because it's not that I was ashamed or anything. It was more like, isn't everyone doing this? I thought that, I thought a lot of people were doing that. And so, discovering that a lot of people weren't, it was definitely harder to be open about my mental health, because when I would, some people would look at you differently, which is like, I think it's interesting how much has changed in like the past 10 years, where I think back then you probably wouldn't even mention you're seeing a therapist or psychologist, but the amount of times I hear that in the workplace now and places I work, where people just outright go, oh, my therapist suggested this. And I was like, oh, okay, like your therapist, that's
Yes.
cool. Like it's cool that it's become so much more normal in certain
Yes.
places, that people just kind of outright mention that they have a therapist or a psychologist. I'm like, that's so exciting. And I think even like I was with a group of people and we were talking about what are some of like the good therapists around? Like, how do we get psychologists? Especially me, because I was new to DC. It's like, what do I do? And people were just so open about it. And these were people I didn't even know. Like it was at my job, but I didn't really know half of them. I was like, all right, we're talking in a group of six, but I don't even know some of them. And so again, the idea that people are so much more, I don't want to say vulnerable, because like just talking about your mental health and also like just seeking medical treatment, I get you have to be a little vulnerable, but I just love that we're treating it as like as normal as going to a regular or going to a doctor, like a medical doctor. And I like that because it doesn't need to be stigmatized, and we also don't need to be vulnerable. Like I don't need to, we can in certain times, but I think that like in the workplace I shouldn't have to share everything about my mental health, and I don't think
Absolutely.
and that doesn't need to be pressured. Like I should
Yes.
be encouraged to talk about mental health, but I don't need to go into detail about what my story is. And I'm glad that like boundaries were already there and people already realize that we don't talk about anything personal unless we want to, unless we want to bring it up.
Thank
Um,
God, though, right? Like, imagine like having to wear, like, take that mask off or what have you 100% of the time. I mean, I would not be able to function in any capacity of my life if like I had to be vulnerable and honest and raw and like, going to the gym or being with my partner or being at work, or it would just be exhausting. Like, there's a time and a place. I totally agree. It's like finding those times and places.
mhm.
Absolutely. I think we all understand as three folks who work in the mental health like advocacy space, it's kind of ironic because often in our workplaces or if we're working on a project or with an organization, they almost bait us to share something about our personal stories, especially if they hear like, "Oh, you speak, you're a storyteller, you do that for a living." So excuse me, I've often felt like propped up to speak and to share almost sometimes, and it can be really hard to just put your hand up and put the wall up and the boundary up and be like, I'm not here to share about my bipolar disorder with a room of my 10 closest colleagues while we're working on deliverables for a grant or something very intense and something completely unrelated to um, the task at hand. And I just think it's a very unique experience that we've probably all had at some point, given our profession and the arena that we work in, that other folks who work in different fields just simply don't understand. It's just a very unique and I feel like uncommon experience that's specific to our field. I use heavy air quotes there.
No,
Yeah.
I like totally agree with that because even when I'm done with a presentation and there'll be a Q&A and I'll always get this question. I don't know, Zane, if this is similar to you, but they'll say, "Isn't it exhausting or isn't it hard opening up and sharing your story over and over and over again?" Because like it's been like 6 years. And my answer every time is, well, I share what I feel comfortable sharing. Like, I'm not sharing, there are some things that I only share with my therapist. There are some things that I haven't shared with anybody yet because I don't feel super comfortable. And this is just what I feel comfortable sharing publicly and getting vulnerable about publicly in order to A, like fulfill my job, but B, help like reach another individual. And I'm sure you've touched not just like one individual, but many by sharing what you do share.
I'm very open about how it can be exhausting because when I do get questions like that, or I do tell, like in my story, my messaging that, you know what, if it's ever exhausting, you need to step away, that's fine. Because I think sometimes as advocates, we get kind of warped in the advocacy world that we sometimes forget to take care of ourselves. And mostly because the work that we're doing, we think that we're helping people. Oh, no, we are. But what I mean is, it's like we're focused so much on helping other people, and instead we don't focus on ourselves. I think that is some of the issues I have with certain advocates because they forget to take care of themselves. And I think that's sad to see because again, we should try to live by our words. And so if you're encouraging others to open up and take space and have boundaries, if you're also not doing it yourself, you're not taking your advice and you're not helping yourself. And so I always tell people like, if it's ever to the point where advocacy work is exhausting you, I just think it's okay to take a step back. It's not like you're betraying the mental health community. In fact, I think
Right.
you're doing a huge service by preaching what you do and saying, I'm an advocate here, but you know what? I gotta take a step back. I'm reevaluating. Maybe I'm getting a new career.
Yes.
Maybe I'm doing less advocacy. It doesn't mean you're turning your back on anyone or anything. It's just saying that my priorities have changed. I'm still passionate about it. I still talk about it, but
Mhm.
I don't know if I can do advocacy anymore. And I also think that there should be no pressure to get involved in advocacy. Like I know that many people that have mental health conditions, they already have to live with having a mental health condition. Doesn't mean that's inherently harder. And it's not even just the condition itself. It's just of course the barriers in society that are placed. It's especially when you look at like the disability movement, some people even share that it's they're not disabled from their disability. They're disabled from outside forces, from environments, from ableism, from stigma. I'm on the bandwagon that's definitely like you have a mix of the two. So like, mental health condition definitely does impact your ability to function in some areas, but in other areas it doesn't. And so that's kind of what I would say about that. Yeah.
I love that authenticity, and it is about walking the walk if you're talking the talk. And I think that's like a big core value, at least to the three of us, but it also is for a lot of the organizations and even like universities and basically any modality doing mental health advocacy or work, mental health work in general. A lot falls under that umbrella. But yeah, thank you, Zane, for really honing in on how important authenticity is. Absolutely, for sure. Not to switch gears, but you brought up your passions and your work in the DEI space. And for any listeners who don't know what the acronym DEIA or DNI or any of the following letters mixed together, could you tell them what the acronym means? And could you just tell us a bit about what you're doing, why you got involved, and what it means to you to be working in that field?
Yeah, and my official title, like my role, I'm an internal communication specialist. So my role touches DEI work, but that's not the sole focus of my work. But anyways, DEIA is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And some people also use the term JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Essentially, what these things are, usually if it's its own department of DEIA, it's really about how do you make the organization more inclusive, more diverse, more accessible, and you do that by, if they offer programs, if they offer speakers that are talking about different things. Like I suggested a code switching workshop that they did a couple weeks ago. So it can be anything about that. It could be about workplace trauma, workplace grief. It's really almost anything, in my opinion, where there's like pockets in the organization where injustice is happening.
Could you
And
describe code switching?
yeah, I mean, for me, what code switching is just kind of like where you kind of have to switch how you present yourself in the workplace to
Okay.
appear a specific form of professionalism. And if that's how you dress, how you speak, yeah, I mean, people have to change their hair, the way they dress, the words they use, if they use certain, slang or different words they use in their community. It's a lot more challenging to bring that to the workplace. And so when you code switch, it's like you're removing certain degrees of yourself that you wouldn't be with other people. And so sometimes it's purposeful, but sometimes it can be problematic, especially if what you're bringing isn't, nothing's wrong with what you're saying or anything like that. It's just slang that hasn't been accepted in the workplace and treated as professional. So again, when you see that, it's like corporate America and corporations still kind of uphold a specific set of what professionalism is, and it's not necessarily always inclusive. So that's kind of like what code switching is. And so that is just like one topic that is talked about, or there's like a upstander intervention, which is like the extra step of being a bystander. Instead of being a bystander, you're an upstander. Then there's like microaggressions, which that's like when you commit like aggressions, but they're at the micro level. And so that's like if you see a comment like about I can't think of an example right now, but I think, or like someone that speaks two languages, and
Mhm.
that English is not their first language, and you go and say you're very eloquent for who you are. Why can't
Yes.
why wouldn't they be? I mean, and also like sometimes you have to understand, like, you may be coming from a good place and that was clearly a compliment, but there's also an underlying layer there that's saying you can't be a competent speaker or articulate because your first language isn't English. But I get what they're saying. Like, even when I see when a person speaks two languages and they speak English beautifully, you might want to compliment, but you have to be careful not to say, you could say, oh, I love how you speak. Like, I think that's fine. But then to go, you're very eloquent for who you are. Like, that's amazing.
It's
No.
another layer. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can compliment, but don't bring up like identities. Like, oh, like my mentor who is blind, when she was doing her doctorate program after the first semester, the dean came up and said, "Oh, I'm really impressed that you made it this far." And
Mm,
impressed by what? Because they
mm.
have a disability. That's what I mean. So that's like a microaggression, and it's
Left, right, and center in corporate culture.
yeah.
Every few minutes you hear.
And I know they say micro, so it's like at a smaller level, but like it can have pounds and pounds of psychological damage on you.
Right, it's major impact because like just like how you talked about you know, like not necessarily a microaggression, or maybe it could be, but when you were a kid and people would call you sensitive for like feeling feelings, and
Mm,
you know, like it might not, to them it was one comment or a couple comments, but you know, to the individual, you could carry that into the rest of your life and have that be a part of your identity. And
mhm,
it could just be like one little comment that maybe they didn't mean any harm, maybe they did, but it still wasn't the right thing to say. I mean, do you
mhm.
find it difficult to, I guess, like teach individuals about topics such as these and like changing behaviors? Because I could imagine that, you know, it could be difficult to grasp at times for some.
I
Also, like to challenge yourself, like, is it my responsibility to be teaching folks this just because I know that it's a microaggression? Like, that could also take a toll on you as
That's
well.
true. That's true. I didn't even think about that. That's right.
That's just like labor being put on folks who are experiencing it firsthand or know what's going on. And
give me 1 second. You have to cut this. Sorry, my foot is asleep.
heard.
Oh no,
Sorry,
it's okay.
it's a little bothering me just a little. Here, let me just
We're
um
good. We can take like a little potty break if we need to too.
no, it's okay. Okay, wait. Okay. Sorry. I will say that I never consider myself an educator. I don't. Because I know some people go, it's not my job to educate you. Well, you're not an educator. And I understand like some people actually are. I think that people have, distinction that they're educators. I think that they're educating. But for me, it's like I'm just sharing my perspective. I'm just sharing the research that I've done. This is what I know of. I'm not educating though. I just don't like it that way. I don't like it framed that way because I also think like if you are engaging in conversation with someone that is kind of resisting kind of what you're saying, I don't think it's right for you to put yourself on a pedestal. And I think you're doing that when you say that. I think that, well, I'm educating you. You're the uneducated one. You're the one that needs to be taught this. And I understand that some people are not coming at it that black and white, but I think that's how it sounds though. Like if someone were to come to me and be like, this is my perspective, and they go, well, your perspective is wrong. I'm here to educate you. It's like, well, wait, so I'm educated. No. And so like I think you have to be careful. I personally don't like the term educated unless you're an educator. Unless you have qualifications to be an educator. I think it's like, no, I'm not here to educate you. We're here to have a conversation. Let's invite the conversation. So we're still equal here. So I think the moment you start saying, I'm educated, I'm telling you why your way is wrong, you've already like uninvited them. The conversation's over. And I think that you can engage in a good, healthy dialogue when you do that. And so what I've learned is like, invite the conversation. Even if they're saying something that you disagree with, or you're like, I don't get this. And it's like, we'll explore that. Like, why do you think this? Like, why do you think this stereotype exists? Or why do you think about this stereotype that way? Whatever it is that they're perpetuating, I don't think it's good to say that's just racist, that's just sanist, or that's anti-mental health. It's like, well,
Absolutely.
let's look at it first. I
Yes.
think that, explore what they're thinking, because maybe they're not thinking the way you're thinking it. Maybe you just need to explore it more and you're like, oh, I see what you mean. You didn't mean it that way. So it's like, again, you're both kind of learning through that conversation. But again, if the person's being blatantly rude or blatantly discriminatory, you can try your best, but at that point, it's like, all right, we're ending the conversation because there's no point in doing this. Like, so I get when you ask that question, it's like, I've never come across someone like that. I've never come across someone that was so against what I was saying. I've been around people that just didn't understand. They were like, I don't really like understand the need for this, or why certain disability or people with disabilities need this, or they need accommodations. That to me is like, it is a bit ridiculous, but they were like, they're trying to understand where I'm coming from. But at the end of the day, if you're kind of confronted with someone like that, just kind of know your place and where you are. So like if it's someone that really doesn't have influence or any impact on your life, it's like maybe just,
Power. Yeah.
yeah, if they really don't have anything or any power on your life, just like maybe just move on. Because like, for some it's like you try your best. You can't do it, you can't do more. That's where I think it gets really exhausting as an advocate. If you're taking on that role to tell other people more about mental health and to teach others, I think it's difficult if you're gonna be like confront that kind of resistance. But I think at the end of the day, if they really don't have a lot of impact on your life, if they're really giving you a lot of heartache for what you're presenting, it's like we're just gonna have to just move on here. Like I can't carry this burden of trying to help you understand. And again, if that's the case, time to move on, because you don't want to burn yourself out by doing that.
Right. So it's just like tabling it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because as soon as, just like how you were saying, like as soon as you go into saying, well, I'm going to educate you about this, it no longer becomes a conversation. And the wall goes up, the defenses go on potentially. So that's
And I
actually
think
a really
also,
good perspective.
yeah, the walls go up, and also I think people don't understand is they're coming in with a bias then, because the person on the other end is going to be, well, so I'm not educated and you're going to tell me how I'm wrong. But the other person is coming and thinking, I'm going to educate you because you don't understand anything, or you don't understand where I'm coming from,
Right.
rather than let's get rid of all that egos aside and just be equal and just speak to each other like humans and see where you can find that middle ground, basically. And I think people forget that we're consumed with middle ground. Like, so many things we have middle ground in, but I think because there's so much polarity now, that it seems like that's
Yes.
I think that there's like a facade that it's like it's difficult to achieve civility and common ground. It's like, no, 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 a lot of us do that. Like, we can still do that, like, trust me. And I think that the inability to communicate with one another, if it's about mental health or politics or whatever, is going to further divide and then further stereotypes people, because you're not having conversation with someone. And I think when you don't have
Absolutely.
conversations with people, stereotypes grow. Because instead of talking to the person, you're thinking, oh, the stereotype is growing in your head. These people are like this is like this, and it's like, well, have you talked to them? Have you actually talked to people in this community? Then you realize, no, that was just the stereotype perpetuating in your head, and it grows when you don't challenge yourself and talk to people that are different from you. And that's why diversity is so important. And going back to the original question, that's why DEIA work is so important, because it's all about how you I mean, you could do DI in everything, but I'm talking about workplace here.
Yes, you
Like,
can.
yeah, I mean, like with government, politics, I mean, any space where there's like any space where there is an organizational structure, of course, you can definitely have DEI work. But specifically in the workplace is what I'm referring to, is making sure that the workplace is, diversify the workplace, you have inclusive opportunities, you're making sure that everyone has some form of a sense of belonging. And that's becoming I wouldn't say it's a newer term, but I see it's becoming like a buzz term where a lot of people are
It's
using.
trendy. Everyone
Yeah, it's
wants
pretty
to
trendy now.
achieve that and write it into their strategic plans and put it in their mission statement. And I feel like it's becoming hard to tell who's doing it intentionally and doing the work and who's just writing it in to get things done or boxes checked. It is definitely a trend.
And when you're doing it right, I think it's a beautiful thing to accomplish, because I think, like, instead of saying like we're trying to diversify the workforce, and it's like, what does that look like? Like, we can have specific numbers, but what is the end goal here? Is it, oh, we've diversified the workplace and that's it? No. The end goal, I think, is like something along the lines of, you have this sense of belonging, because again, you can diversify the workplace, you can offer inclusive opportunities, but if employees are still reporting that there's no sense of belonging, why would they feel comfortable going to work then? And if they're not comfortable going to work, um, they just don't feel like they're going to have a place, and things can happen. Like, that's where burnout can happen. That's where people lose inspiration or motivation to do the work, and they may still do it, but they've lost that drive of why they do it. And so, having a sense of community and belonging in the workplace is really important. I'm actually like the co-chair of the disability network at where I work, and so that's been really exciting. And just having spaces like that where people can kind of explore what it means to have a disability or to be this specific race in the workplace is always, such a great thing to have. And sometimes we have candid conversations about that. And it gives people really the outlet to really talk about these things, because again, you don't have to talk about everything. And for some, they do find it uncomfortable to talk about their disability to their supervisor or manager. It doesn't matter why. Or no, this doesn't matter. We may not know why, because like, it could be that their manager doesn't want to hear it, or maybe because you just don't know. Again, like I said, when you don't communicate, sometimes the feelings can just keep bottling up and keep snowballing. And so when you look at something like that, and it's like, oh, I have my supervisor, I don't want to mention that I have a disability because they're going to look at me a certain way. The more you don't say that, the more you might think that, which means you might be less likely to ever say you have a disability in the workplace or you have a mental health condition. But it's nice when you have places where you can talk about it, where you host workshops or meetings where let's talk about what it means to have a disability. Let's give advice on how we can actually self ID that we have a disability in the workplace. And so it's always great when you have like these communities where you can like, talk about things, especially things that, haven't been really embraced by corporate America. Slowly getting there, but
You
it's
have a long way to go.
yeah.
For sure. For sure. I love that you work for National Geographic, so I won't say your work. National Geographic sounds like they're doing as much as they can, not too quickly. It sounds like not only you're all being very intentional about driving the work, but also um, safe. I don't know another word to use other than safe, and allowing people to share what they want to when, and not propping them up, putting them like up on a pedestal and saying, preach to the people who don't know and educate them, coming back to your point earlier. So I'm just thrilled to hear that, Zane. And thank you for taking those few minutes to really dive into, giving a snapshot of what it's like to work on DEI in any corporate space. I feel like that experience just applies to any corporate space, not just the mental health field, not just working for a specific corporation like National Geographic. So thank you for sharing all of that.
And
Um,
I will say last
yeah,
thing to say about DIA. I know that some people are threatened by DEIA. And I'm not going to assume what people's motivations are, but I think that some people, um, it just depends. I know some people that definitely don't want a diverse workplace. I know that there are people that are out there, but some people feel that, less stories are going to be told about them and their communities as well, that certain communities are going to be given priority. So I understand where they're coming from, but they also have to kind of understand that for like a vast majority of time, those communities have not had those stories told.
it's their
And
turn.
right. And it doesn't mean you neglect other communities as well.
Right.
Because when you look at that, it's like, well, disability is still going to be very much neglected because it's still a very underrepresented community that if you look at all DIA programs, only 4% include disability. That came out from Harvard Business Review. So we have to be careful because like, are we prioritizing certain groups over others? How are we making sure that we're really giving equal opportunity and equal equity to a huge array of groups? And that's where I think DIA, that's when you're doing it right, is when you're taking into account all the several different perspectives that you can get. And it's difficult. But if you're not getting those perspectives, like, because like you say, we're not getting those perspectives in the workplace. Like we don't have a lot of people with disabilities. Why is that? And so just question why that is. Doesn't mean that your hiring is necessarily discriminatory, but it's like maybe there's something there on why people with disabilities don't want to work here, or people of certain races aren't applying here. And so like it's something to think about. And so DIA work is hard because you're like always questioning things and you're always wondering how can things be more inclusive and how can we make, like you said, a space more welcoming and safe. But that's the challenge. But I'm not in DIA work. It's just it does definitely cuts
You're
with what I
still
do.
killing it though, Zane.
Yeah. Thank you.
You are. It's your passion project. And speaking of passion projects, Kristen and I are really curious to know, like, what is on your plate right now? What are you working on? You shared a little bit about some of your recent appearances on upcoming programs, but we just want to hear what's going on with you. What's up?
Oh gosh. I mean, a couple of things like, just the things I'm doing at work, but I'm like writing for other blogs now. I'm trying to do a lot more writing. And so when people ask me about how to get published, it's just kind of like just um try to get your foot in the door and like just writing for one blog or two, or like contributing in this place or putting your voice out there, even if it's posted on LinkedIn, whatever it is. But I'm writing for different blogs, ones that have approached me. And so that's the major thing that I'm working on. Honestly, I'm gonna be honest, for the most part, I'm not working on too much. Right now I'm just kind of focusing on myself.
I
As you
kind of
should
love
be.
that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Just trying
Yes.
different things like this summer. The first week of July I went to Portugal. It was the first time I was out of the country of the United States, and that was amazing. Then afterward, I was like, I want to explore more. So I've done different hobbies. I've done a lot of swimming. I did ice skating recently, and then
Love
I
that.
went paragliding 3 weeks ago. So
What?
just trying different things like that, trying to be more adventurous.
Okay, I love that. I love to hear all of
You're
it.
practicing what you preach. You said everyone should slow down. If you're
Yeah.
in if you're in the space preaching it and advocating for it, slow down, and you're doing it. I'm still hung up on the
And it
paragliding.
wasn't, and it definitely wasn't that before. Like I definitely, sometimes I focus just too much on my mental health. But again, it's like if I'm just focused solely on my mental health, but I'm not exploring a different side of my life, am I really focused on my mental health? Probably not. And so, part of my mental health it was empty in that place where it was like I don't have a good work-life balance here. And so um now I just kind of want to explore so many different things. And I think like it's interesting, like, the first time I traveled out of the country and it changed my life basically. Just how amazing it was, and just realizing that I'm actually really adventurous and I want to see so much more. And like going from the trip, and like I literally transformed so much. It's like that was literally 1 week in one country. Oh, there's so much. Like I'm
What
so
inspired
excited.
you to go there? Like, what was this planned a long time ago, or was it like,
Yeah.
fuck it, I'm gonna buy tickets to Portugal?
No, it wasn't that. I would not do that because, well, especially the place I was in before, I was like, no, I'm not in a place where I'm just gonna buy tickets and go somewhere. I was like too scared for that. And so no, it was. I'm actually good friends with a famous photographer in Canada. He does something called the Arrested Movement series where he photographs men. And so I've been in contact with him for a year. Him and I are like really good friends now. And so he told me about this. He's like, he told me about this like in probably February. And so he was like, yeah, I'm going to be a facilitator for this retreat. So it was a retreat. And then I was like, okay. And so I was like, he's like, if you're interested, you should definitely go. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to go to this. And so, but I remember looking into it more and I was like, no, I have to go. I have to do something because I'm preventing myself these opportunities because of my mind, and because I thought I was too scared to travel or it was too expensive. But it was actually not as bad as I thought it'd be. And I ended up going, and even like throughout the trip, not the trip, but throughout the process of going to the trip, it was kind of like I told myself many times, I'm gonna go, I'm not gonna go, I'm gonna go. And I think that's just something I do. Like I second guess myself. Even when I got this job, I remember questioning the whole weekend when I got it. I was like, I'm gonna do it, I'm not gonna do it. Like hell bent on like not doing it or hell bent on doing it. It's kind of frustrating, but that's kind of how I was. I was really worried. I was super anxious because I get huge travel anxiety, especially leaving the country. And so I was so nervous. But when I finally decided to do it, I got my passport the day before I left. Yep, I know. So I got
That
my
would
passport
be
Got my passport a day
deteriorating.
before I left. Yeah. Luckily I was in DC, and what people don't know is when you're in
There you
DC,
go.
you can go to the office and you get it that day. You don't have to wait like months like you do when you send out your documentation. So I was a very, very, very fortunate that I was able to get it. But yeah, the trip was amazing. And so I don't think necessarily something inspired me, but I was told about it. And also I've known the guy for a year and I was like, I would love to finally meet because we chat all the time. And so it was very nice meeting him. And it was basically a retreat for queer men, and a place where we can kind of just be safe and be queer in a different country and kind of explore wellness, body positivity, and anything else that comes up. So it was a great experience. And also it was great about the retreat was there was no expectation to do anything, which I thought was good. That's nice. That's what should be done.
That is a retreat.
Yeah, it was like if we're gonna go to the beach. If you don't want to, you want to hang out at the place, just stay here. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely gonna do everything because like I want to soak up everything. But oh yeah, but there was definitely times where I remember we went to a bar. We went a couple times that week, and it was like, all right, I just need to go. So I was like, it was like the third night we went. I was like, I'm just gonna go straight back to the hotel. I can't be around. I can't be here right now. And it was not personal. It was like, oh, okay, like it was really just like, oh, okay, you're just taking care of yourself. That's it. No expectation to do anything. Nobody took it personal because I feel like when you go on trips with people, it's like you don't want to hang out with them. It's like, well, do you want
Yeah.
to hang out with us? Like, is there something wrong? Did we do
Yeah.
something? Or what's up with you? And it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with just wanting to do something independently, or like I need to set up.
Recharge. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were very intentional about recharging, and just taking care of your mental health more than I've ever experienced. So if I ever do my own retreat or go to another one, I hope that the rules are applied where that's the case, where no pressure to do anything. And I think also if there's a pressure to do something, it's like it can be an issue. And that's why, like, when you look at like trauma-informed yoga, you're always making sure you're asking for
Yes.
consent. You're always making sure that they have the power of their choices rather than you have to do this. Because I think you maybe put in a position where you're just, again, uncomfortable, or you just are not vibing with whatever's going on. And that's against the purpose of a retreat then.
I would say like the worst vacations are when there's like a huge itinerary and you're going to like a very relaxing place, but it's like wake up at 7 a.m. because we're going kayaking, and then after that we have lunch reservations, and then and it's like no. That makes me want to do it even less.
You
But if it was like a surprise kayaking trip, I would be totally down. So I don't know if that's just me, but I do find that, being able to have choices is very important, and having people around us that respect those choices and don't take it personally is like just chef's kiss, the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So before I ask my like cute little kind of wrap up question, Kristen, and we'll cut this here. Is there anything else we want to chat about while we have the wonderful Zane here?
Um, I'm trying to think. Maybe I guess like, maybe like something that our listeners would want to know is, surrounding mental health, surrounding mental illness. Like, it's not something that goes away. Like, I am a person with mental illness, and like, I just because like I'm in active or sometimes inactive recovery, right? Like, it's not always active. Um, there are times where I'll be like, man, like it's been 5 years, man, it's been 8 years. And like, I wake up one day and I just don't want to be around people, and I don't want to go to work. And then one day turns into 2 days, and 2 days turns into 1 week. And it's like, I find myself in like a mental health crisis, and it kind of sneaks up on me. Like, I guess like I would want to ask you if you were comfortable answering, like, have you ever had experiences like that where, everything in life seems to be perfectly great and perfectly fine, but like on the inside, like you feel like that you want to die and there's like no discernible reason.
Mhm. Yeah, I will. I will share that, like, I always share this story, but it was kind of like when I was a university student, I was in my third year. I won't go into detail on like what was going on in my life, but I will just share that it was a really hard time, probably the hardest of my life. And it was for many factors, many conditions that were happening, but that was there was a point where the mental, how do I say this? The mental pain was too hard to manage. So unfortunately, I tried to take matters in my own hands with the physical pain, which was very difficult. And so, I did start harming myself, which is, never, ever a good thing. And I smile just because, like, it feels so, like, I don't know what I was thinking when I did it. It just feels like something I would never do. Now, I feel that way now, but last week, I was having horrible body issues. I was having horrible body issues. I was anxious, so anxious. I don't know why. And I felt like doing it. And just like you said, it's like I didn't. Well, I was gonna say I didn't necessarily want to die, but no, those thoughts were definitely crossing my mind. I think the hardest part is that what people don't understand is like we just don't think those thoughts. Hey, those thoughts are barging right through the front door, though. If someone's gonna, if someone's gonna, if someone barges through your front door, what do you do? Like you're in such a vulnerable place. It's like, do you fight them off? You try your hardest. You're not strong enough. So what do you do? And so I don't know. For me, it's just kind of like when those feelings come up. I think for me, it's like explore them. Why am I feeling this way? What potentially triggered me? But again, don't stress yourself out about doing that because if you have a mental health condition, there may not be no rhyme, reason, or why it's happening. Sometimes your mind is it just happens. And so I think that the most important thing is like you have your corner, you have your circle of people that you can talk to this stuff about because you can't do it by yourself. And I know a lot of people that try, but when people try to do it alone, and they might succeed and have, you know, a powerful story to tell. I think that it was a lot harder on them and their body than it could have been if they had, you know, even if it's just one person that they could talk to. And so even if, like, I don't remember where this statistic comes from, but it's like we're more willing to share we're suicidal with a friend rather than a family member, rather than a stranger, rather than a counselor. I mean, of course, it depends on everyone. You know, some people have counselors and they're willing to talk to them more. But, you know, I think by and large, a lot of people are actually willing to share if they're having suicidal thoughts to a friend. And so I know a lot of people say, well, I'm just their friend. I don't do anything. I just listen to them. Do you not understand how powerful that is though? Do you like do not discredit what you do. If you question yourself and think, I don't do a lot, I just listen to people's problems. Again, you don't understand how powerful that is for someone. You have no idea. And so for one, give yourself more credit that you actually may be doing a lot for someone. And also, like, you know, when you have your circle of people, show appreciation as well, you know, and don't just take advantage of them when you have these moments of crisis. Because I know certain people that when they have a crisis, they reach out to me and I never hear from them otherwise. And it's nice that, you know, they feel safe enough to address something, but it's like I'm not a priority enough that you just want to hang out with me when you're not experiencing a crisis.
You're also not their therapist or a trauma worker
Okay.
that's just there to triage that. I just want to
Yeah.
say that you're just not, and
And I
it's not
don't have
fair to
the
you.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
don't have the experience to do so. And if I did, still wouldn't do it because there's a fine line of when you're a therapist. And it's like, no, I'm not giving you free therapy work. And you should go see your own therapist because also we're friends here. Like there's a bias happening here, and that friend relationship, you know, is not something you want in a therapist relationship. You know, I think also like if you're slowly becoming good friends with your therapist and your sessions feel like you're just becoming friends, it might be like maybe you should look for another therapist. Not that they're doing anything bad, but it's like, are you actually getting the help you need, or are you just becoming friends? And so I've talked to therapists that like are hard about that, or like they have boundaries about my clients can't contact me when we're not in our sessions because I also have a work-life balance I need to establish, you know, and I love hearing that. But I will say you never know when it comes up, and that's one thing that I think people have to understand is like you don't have to question why something is. Like when someone goes, "Oh, like let's figure out why you're feeling this way." It's like that they can do that. Maybe they just need your support because or maybe that would help. But again, it's also important like communicate how you're feeling, and if they're trying to give your advice, they're trying to give advice, or they're saying that let's explore why you're feeling this way, it's okay to kind of step your ground and say, no, that's not really what I need. I just need someone to listen to me because right now there is no reason. Like I've done the work myself. Right now it's just too difficult to pinpoint what's making me so upset. Can we just talk, or can we just like watch a movie or whatever it is that's going to help you. And so
Sometimes
that's
you just need somebody to be a sounding board. Like a friend of mine, we have this rule where we pick up the phone and we say, "Do you have a minute?" And "Do you have a minute?" usually means like, "Do you have an hour?" And the other friend who's on the other line will be like, "Do you want feedback at the end of this, or do you just want somebody to listen?" And it
mhm.
sounds like so like I don't know. It sounds kind of clinical, but it really helps that like, no, I just need somebody to listen to me right now. Or actually, like I really need somebody's perspective on this, and that's why I'm calling you.
Yeah. I don't think that's clinical at all. That's a beautiful part of your friendship and very healthy that you can both communicate that
No,
as a
and
clinical person
right.
here.
Well, and like I've been able to translate that in like other relationships in my life too. And they're like, "Where did you hear that?" And I'm like, "My friend made it up,
That's
or she
beautiful.
heard it from somebody else." And so I don't know. I think that analogy that you used of somebody's like barging down your door, like it doesn't help when somebody's like, "Well, you should have gotten a stronger door." It's like, okay, well, the person's in my house right now, so like, what do I do? And to not like fight that alone, I think is really really important. So I want to thank you for sharing, just being vulnerable here, because I know like I can relate, and I'm sure Kelly can too, about what that feels like.
And there's no knocking. Because I think some people go, well, did you let that person in? No, there was no knocking. They didn't make their presence known. It just came. And I think if people don't have mental health conditions, they have a hard time understanding that. They're like, well, how can you not be in control? How can you not like how can you let these feelings just overwhelm you? It's like, again, don't question, it just is. if you want to do more research, learn about it, because there are millions of people that happens to all the time. And so, I understand that you're questioning, you want to learn about it, but do it in a different way where it's not judging someone else if you really don't understand. And again, there's nothing wrong with not understanding, but I think coming from a place of curiosity rather than judgment, I think is where the line is drawn.
Always,
Yeah, where
always.
you really empower someone when you come from a place of curiosity. Doesn't mean you have to ask every single thing, but it's like, I'm curious why you feel this way. Do you mind sharing? Rather than, I don't get why you're feeling this way. It's kind of ridiculous. And so, like when you have like those two opposites, but they both want to help you. It's just the way you do it.
Well, it
And
creates
sometimes,
stigma if you're like,
right.
nailing
Yeah.
down on somebody like, well, you shouldn't be feeling this way. Why are you? It's like, well,
Oh my gosh, that's right. And I'm even thinking like, when I see things like you're always so happy or you're this, and like, what do you have to be worried about? Or like, especially with children, I see that with kids, especially in like media and TV shows where they go, I mean, you're 13, 14 years old. What you don't have a care in the world. And it's like, well, that's not true at all. And I understand that, people who are adults have more responsibility, like financial responsibilities or raising kids. But I don't think that a person who's 13 or 14 has no worry in the world. I mean, that's why we have a mental health crisis for kids, most definitely, and
Absolutely.
young people, because I wouldn't say essentially you're told that, but that's part of it. That's kind of like taken away from their story and just kind of like devaluing how they're feeling, that they're having a hard time right now, but you're saying, well, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. I don't know. I just think that to me, it's problematic to say, because how would I feel comfortable sharing how I'm feeling if you just think that I should have everything together as a young person? And so, yeah, and to finish the story before from the, when I was self-harming, but it wasn't that, like I wanted to die by suicide all the time, like almost all the time. Like that whole semester was like, I can't remember how often it was, but it was so often and so frequent. It was so traumatizing. I don't know why it was like that. I just had, there was so much going on in my head and my body and the people around me. And so I eventually ended up leaving that semester, which I think was the best thing for me. And then I came out of it. Like that's afterward is when I came out as a mental health advocate. Because before I really wasn't an advocate, it was just my lived experience. But then I realized like, oh my gosh, there's so many organizations that can help me. And this was such a hard time that I know millions of other people experience this. And I don't want people to experience that. Unfortunately, that's not the case, because I think some people look at that and say, I don't want people to have suicidal thoughts. I don't want this. It's like, you can't do that as an advocate. That it's never going to happen. And so sometimes, like, I think some people strive for impossibility. I know some people go, well, the impossible is possible. It's not impossible, like in this situation, though. It's not. You cannot, we're never going to live in a world where suicide is not an issue. It will always be an issue. The
We
less
can't get rid of it. Yeah.
Right. The less suicides, the better. Of course. Of course, less suicides, the better. But we have to understand that we can avoid it. We can assume that things are getting better, that less people are suicidal. No, actually, maybe you think the world's in a better place, but more people are more suicidal now, actually, than previous generations.
Or it's the same and they're just talking about it and seeking help at a higher
Right.
rate. Yeah, I
No,
think that's
that's
also
definitely
it.
real. That's definitely true.
Yeah,
I know some people question,
absolutely.
why is this generation or my generation of Gen Z, why are they so
Yeah,
sensitive? Why are they so open about their mental health? Well, I don't think
we're
there's anything wrong with
not.
being open.
Yeah,
Right. I don't think there's anything wrong with being open about it. I understand where they're coming from, because like that's
yes.
very, very opposite of what your generation did. And then they're gonna say, well, why are young people having so many mental health conditions? Like we weren't like that. It's like, well, maybe y'all didn't talk about it. Maybe a lot of y'all would, because especially like I think some like the workplace, and like there are many spaces
Yes.
there are so many spaces now that are better than they were like in the 60s and 70s. So it's like I'm sure a lot of y'all actually were having a lot of hard mental health challenges, but a lot of y'all just didn't talk about it. I'm not saying like things are better now. There's always challenges, but in some regards, like it is better now.
We have the tools, resources, organizations. Our government is prioritizing youth mental health and absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what I would say about the
Yeah.
suicide is, don't be afraid of the word. Make sure
Hmm.
like we're using the term suicide here. And I think that it's good when you intentionally say the word suicide, because again, not everyone, but a lot of people think that you're going to plant the idea in someone's head. which the amount of times I've said that's not the case at all. I mean, studies have proven that that doesn't happen. And it's interesting that, you know, some of the phrases that I hear, like people want to unalive themselves. I think that's an interesting one, but I still
Hmm.
think that we should not be afraid of using the word suicide. We don't
No,
need to say,
I think it's important to use the
Mhm.
correct terms because I'm pretty sure there's a statistic out there that says, or some sort of fact, that if you ask somebody directly, do you want to harm yourself? Do you want to like attempt or complete suicide? That it actually removes a barrier because you're being like, you're not putting stigma associated with it. That
Right.
it's just like, this is it. This is, do you feel this way? Or do you have a plan? Or do you want to do this? Not, well, like, do you feel the
Are
desire
you
to,
actively? Yeah.
yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm like, ugh,
Are
but,
you in active crisis with a plan? Yeah, I think
thank
let's
you.
just normalize it. We all say, we all talk about using destigmatized language, at least in this mental health field, in this advocacy space. And at least for me, at a lot of schools I speak at, because out of all the speakers on the Minding Your Mind team, I go to most of the rural ones, and most of my academic work is in rural mental health and rural youth mental health. I am always asked 9 out of 10 times, do not talk about your suicide. Can you hide the slide? Can you change and type in a different word on the slide? Because it's a giant slide that says, in September of blah blah blah, I attempted to take my life. And yeah, it's definitely a conversation that, I mean, I could talk about it for years and days, hours on end. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation that more folks, I think, in general, not only in schools but in any space, are open to having. And to your point, saying, yeah, say it. Let's just say suicide. It's okay. And we're not enabling. There's no factual evidence-based data to prove that we're enabling young adults or the folks that we're speaking to act, even if they are struggling.
yeah. And I know, at least what's good is that I think a lot of people are coming from the same place though. That like when they say, oh, don't talk about suicide or let's talk about it. Everyone's coming from the place that we want to protect people. We want to help people, you know? And so I understand that. I think a lot of people have good intentions, but is talking about suicide really going to hurt anyone? Um, I don't think so. And again, the studies show that it won't. And I think that when you're open about suicide and you're talking about it, it, like you said, it removes the barrier. And now the person who's feeling it is like, wow, it's something people experience. And maybe I should bring it up. Maybe I should tell my family. Maybe I should tell my friend that I'm feeling this way because I know that it's not just me. I'm not the only one that experiences this. And maybe thinking about how could I communicate better my needs and what I want. And hopefully people are receptive to them. But what else was I gonna say about that? Oh, and I also think I say this a lot. It's like to me, suicide and suicidal thoughts are incredibly common. I think a lot of people look at suicide and they go, that's just like a radical thing. I think, you know, like it is radical to think that you want to, you know, you want to die by suicide. Like it is. Like it's a very hard thing to think. And what I mean is like, yeah, it's a really extreme thing to do to yourself. But it's still a very common thing. Like if you look at the amount of people that attempt, the amount of people that actually have a complete suicide, and of course the thoughts, it's like literally millions of people. Like I mean, I'm sure it's a billion, and so like it's incredibly common. Like
Yeah.
not everyone is going to die by suicide. Not everyone's going to do that, but I think I'm not shocked. I think some people would be shocked that it's very very normal. I think a lot of people at times are going to think I want to die. Some people are not going to die by
Yes.
suicide. They're not going to do that, but you understand what it feels like to want to die though. And there are many people that it's so much harder that they really do want to do that. And so, you know, it's really difficult, but I think that we need to start treating it like it is, which is it's actually like a very normal thing, and it happens a lot more frequently than we're letting on. That wh- like if someone is suicidal, we think that, oh, that's so taboo. Like it's let's treat it as such a taboo subject. It's like, no, actually, like a lot of people have suicidal thoughts. A lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think that I guess the final message for me is like, of course, if you're ever feeling suicidal or you have a friend that is, you know, just be there for them, try to share resources, try to find them help if they, really want it. Of course, you can't force help onto someone. But, and if you're someone who is suicidal, like, please reach out for resources, call 988. And, because there are so many organizations that are willing to help you. There's so many suicide hotlines. But I understand it's very difficult to reach out for help. Please do it, because
We also put a trigger warning on this, Zane. So just know that there will be like a little snippet that comes in of us saying like 988 and the number changed and you could text. And if you don't want to text, you could message.
yeah, great.
But thank you. Thank you, Zane, for that ending beautiful message. And with that, like to dovetail on that, how can folks stay in touch with you? Not only social media, but do you have any resources? Do you have anything that you want to plug? Like, this is your time that we want to give you to talk about ways that folks can keep up with your journey and your life.
Yeah, well, I will start with social media. So it's usually just my name. So if you type in my name, you're gonna find me on Instagram, LinkedIn. Those are the platforms I use the most. And yeah, you can kind of just see what I'm working on. You can always reach out. I always talk to people about like mental health or even finding a job. I do like career coaching stuff. I'm not necessarily a coach, like certified coach, but I help people look for jobs or how to negotiate the salary, all that stuff. And yeah, trying to think what else. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm on the youth board for NAMI. So I'm on the NAMI Next Gen board. And if you want to plug NAMI, that would be great. Because again, all NAMI's resources are free, which is really exciting. I think people don't realize that.
What does NAMI stand for, Zane, if there's anyone listening who doesn't know?
Of course, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so it's a national organization in the United States. And again, all their mental health resources are free. They have guides, they have support groups, and again, all free because they recognize, the disparity of how the mental health system works.
And it's so easy to literally just type in your town or your state, comma, NAMI, and find a chapter. And they literally have groups, programs, media on everything. I feel like under the umbrella of mental illness, especially today, the day that we're recording being, I believe, National Grief Awareness Day. And I know that they have resources on grief.
And then I think today is also International Overdose Awareness Day as well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow.
We are recording on August 31st. So yes, it's a big day with a lot of resources floating around out there. But yes, Zane,
And
where else? Yeah.
on NAMI, do they have online resources as well, or is it just physical? Do we
Oh no, they have
know?
many online resources, yes.
Oh,
And
that's great.
some of their support groups are virtual. So you can definitely tune in virtually if your town or you're not nearby a local chapter.
Awesome. That's really good to know.
And of course, there's also like JED Foundation, Trevor Project. There's
Active Minds.
I was gonna say Active. I was gonna wait for you to say it. Because Kelly used to
All
work.
peace and love.
So there's still so many more. And there's also resources for specific communities. You're like, I need an organization that focuses in Asian mental health. There's Asian Mental Health Collective. There's so many resources. Just please look for them. They really do exist. You just kind of have to be the one to find them. Or, you have someone that tells you about them, so other people that are allies definitely know about these resources that exist too.
That's why you should follow Zane on social media, everyone, because he's always posting about fabulous resources, articles, research, everything that's floating out there. Not only that pertains to your like career path, I've seen you post about everything under the sun. So here's my plug to follow Zane. I get my educational resources from things I'm seeing him post about half the time. So we love that. Well, Zane, is there anything else our listeners can look out for you like in on speaking about? Any messages you want to leave them with?
I don't have anything else like with the with the links, but I think kind of like driving down like our conversation, I think like the most important thing that I think I got out of the conversation is let me think. No, I think that I was gonna say, of course, what I've said many times, which is, you're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's like the biggest trendy thing. I think some people are tired of hearing it, but it's completely true though. And I think a lot of people say, okay, I'm not alone. But I think the hugest issue that's hard with that is you tell people they're not alone, but we also have to like recognize that they may be really in a space where they're alone though. Like they may not be experiencing, I mean, they may experience something very similar to someone else in the world, but where they are, they might be very alone. So please be patient with them. Please be understanding if it takes them a long time for them to be vulnerable or for them to reach out. And again, it's not your job, it's not your burden to get them help. If you've done your job, you shared resources, you share your perspective, it's really up to them. I think you can mention it a couple times, but eventually you just kind of have to say, well, I want you to get help, but I can't do anything about this anymore. And it's a hard thing because like obviously if it's your loved one, it's hard to see it that way. But again, you also have to preserve your energy too. Like what we said, you have to preserve your energy. You look out for others, but again, you have to take care of yourself because then you're doing a disservice to yourself. And then of course, I think we mentioned authenticity. It's like just always strive to be your authentic self, whatever that looks like, and whatever way that, as long as you're being a good person, as long as you're authentically being yourself and a good person and always being kind, that to me is the most important thing you can do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
You,
for
Zane.
joining us, Zane. We'll definitely be in touch in the future, but thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your experiences.
It's been a pleasure, Zane. We're so lucky and happy to have you, and would love to have you back in the future for some more group conversations. And I hope that we could all physically see each other too in person sooner rather than later. I know we're all very busy.
That'd be awesome. But yeah, let me know if you need anything like when the episode comes out. But yeah, if I can
Absolutely.
come back, that would be exciting. But yeah, thank you both so much again. Do you think it went well? It went well, right?
It was
It was
phenomenal.
fantastic.
We have so
I was
much
like a
to
little
work
nervous.
with. Oh my God. No, Zane, you killed it. I mean,